I'd like to share with you a familiar story that can be found there in Mark's Gospel, chapter number 4, verses 35 through 39. Jesus begins this dialogue in verse 35 as this story begins to open, and we don't hear another entry until we get one from the disciples in verse 38 in the form of a question. Notice what he says in verse 35. And the same day, when the even had come, he said unto them, let us pass over to the other side. Notice what he says. Let us pass over unto the other side. Keep that. In verse 35, Jesus says, I want to go on a cruise with you boys. In verse 36, somebody books this cruise. They make their way down to the Florida port where they get aboard the Carnival Cruise Line. And in verse 37, immediately they run into a storm. It's interesting because while 37 is dealing with this storm, it begins to pour over into 38 and talk about the position of Jesus on this ship. The Bible suggests that he can be found there in the hinder part of the ship. And if you know anything about naval terminology, that is reflective of the stern or the aft part, A-F-T, the aft part of this ship. This suggests that Jesus is at the tail end, the rear of the ship. And when you look that same word up with the English definition, you get the term hinder. Hinder means to obstruct. It means to impede. It means to have the inability to do something. Something is blocking the way. It's interesting that Jesus can be found in a place where he can't do anything, where he has no power, where he has been blocked. May I share with you that ships are representational of our lives, and when the winds begin to blow and when the waves begin to toss, we need to recognize who then needs to be at the forefront of our lives. Have we made that job, that career, that husband, that wife, that boyfriend, that girlfriend, that new Chrysler that you just bought? Have you made that house, or perhaps even those children, the forefront of your life? And when the storms start raging like the disciples, you come up asking questions. Notice what they say in verse 38. Master, carest thou not that we perish? Sure he cares. Well, how do you know he cares? He told me he cared in verse 35. Listen to what he says. Let us pass over. My fascination is in the term us. May I share with you this, that even before you get in a storm, God is right there with you. In the midst of your storm, God is right there with you. When you come out of that storm, God is right there with you. It is also interesting to note that while they did not pick Jesus up physically to move him from the stern to the middle part or even the front of the ship, we must come to recognize what needs to be at the forefront. And when they recognized what needed to be at the forefront, because God don't see storms from the back, when they finally moved him to the forefront, notice what happens in verse 39. The Bible says he got up. And when he got up and changed forms from a sleeping Savior to a storm chaser. I want to ask you right now this morning, does anybody in here know my storm chaser? But you may ask the question, well, does your storm chaser have any credentials? Because my brand of hell may be different than that of my neighbors. Let me share with you his credentials. This storm chaser, he's able to move dark clouds out of your way. This storm chaser, he's able to move thunderstorms out of your way. This storm chaser, he's able to move thunderstorms. He's able to move tornadoes. This storm chaser, he's able to move hurricanes out of your way. This storm chaser is able to move typhoons out of your way. Is there anybody in here this morning that wants to know my storm chaser? Because he's able to bring the sun out in your life. I said he's able